Hello everyone, so today we're going to be talking about all the manga I read in August. I read a pretty substantial amount of volumes this month. I think the count was around 65, but I will admit 16 of those volumes happened in a 2-day period because I really enjoyed something I was reading, so I just read all the volumes that were available, but we'll get to that at the end. So let's go ahead and just jump right in with the first thing I read this month. Like many others, I started and finished Run on Your New Legs. If you don't already know, this is a sports manga following this character on the front who semi-recently lost his leg. So now he has to reevaluate his relationship with sports. He used to be a really good soccer player, but now he feels he can't do that anymore, so he's looking into other options. This is a pretty good sports manga. I like the characters, especially the friendships involved. There's a childhood friend character that the main character has kind of fallen out with. So we explored that relationship and also the relationship with the main character and his new teammates on the track and field team. I wrote in my notes that the characters are memorable, but I did read this at pretty much the beginning of August, and at this point, I don't remember too many of the characters. So while I did like them in the moment, I wouldn't call them very, extremely memorable or anything. And probably the most interesting aspect of this manga is the fact that it actually discusses COVID as a thing that affected people in pretty substantial detail that really derails the story, not necessarily in a bad way, but in a different way. You definitely see how COVID affected these characters and their relationship with sports and their high school experience in general. I do think this was done well, but I couldn't help feeling like I wanted to know what would have happened in the story if COVID and the pandemic hadn't been a thing, which is kind of the point. We all want to know what would have happened if the pandemic hadn't occurred, how that changed our lives. So it feels like it fits the series for sure, but I couldn't help wondering what the author had planned for the story before this took place. And honestly, I didn't enjoy reading the parts discussing COVID just because I don't want to read about COVID. I lived through it. Obviously, we all lived through it. I don't need to read about it in manga. But that's just a personal preference thing. It wasn't a flaw in the story. It's just I don't want to read about that, and I didn't actually know that this manga dealt with that before, I don't think. But I will say the ending is very satisfying. Most things are wrapped up. I do notice that in series that are 5 volumes or less, there will almost always be plot points that aren't explored as much as I would like them to be. I've come to the realization that I much prefer longer series. I know many people prefer short series, and while I do love a good short series every now and then, in order for me to have a series be a favorite, it has to be longer than at least 8 volumes or so, just because that gives me more time to really be attached to the characters, stuff like that. So while this is definitely not a new favorite sports manga or anything, I did really enjoy it, and it brings up some important topics related to disability and sports. The next manga I read in August was volumes 1 through 3.5 of The Case Files of Jeweler Richard. There are 5 volumes of the series out. Obviously, if I didn't read all of them, then I didn't particularly enjoy it, but I will get to the details. So I picked this as a mystery thriller manga. I knew it wasn't going to be a thriller manga, but I thought it's definitely a mystery. And while it has mystery elements, they are very, very light, and I would hesitate to call this a mystery at all. I would definitely call it a gemstone manga. It's just about the characters talking about gemstones and the different customers that come into this gemstone shop or jeweler, and kind of their stories, their relationships with the gemstones that they have. I did feel like it got pretty heavy about the gemstone discussions, and this is what this cut means. This is where this gem is mined, and the relationship between these 2 different gems. Anyway, I did honestly find that unengaging. That's part of the reason that I didn't read so many of these volumes. I did like how it explored the sentimental connection between the gemstones and the people who own them. It is pretty episodic in nature, and I think this story lends well to that. But overall, I found it very unengaging. I didn't find the characters that interesting. I mean, Jeweler Richard himself is interesting, but the other guy whose name I can't even remember, I didn't care for him very much. So overall, not a series for me. I might check out the anime, maybe. The light novel, probably not, but we'll see in the future. The next manga I read in August was Moto Hagio's A Drunken Dream and Other Stories. This is, as you can probably tell, a short story collection following a bunch of different stories. The atmosphere and storytelling of these short stories are definitely very dreamlike, so that's why I think the title was chosen. I'm not going to talk about this too much, but I did really enjoy all the short stories in here. I found that they tend to explore families, different family dynamics, usually people who have fallen out of touch and getting back together, reconnecting in different ways. My favorite stories in particular were Iguana Girl and Hanshin Half God, I think that's how you pronounce that. So the titular story, A Drunken Dream, is told entirely in color and it's beautiful. I love Moto Hagio's art and her stories, obviously. The dreamlike atmosphere of them in storytelling is incredible to me, so I'm very glad I bought these manga just spontaneously. I just decided to buy all of her works that I could, and I'm definitely enjoying my read through of all of them. Okay, now for something I did not enjoy, and I feel like many people who follow me will probably know what series I'm talking about, and it will probably be disappointing for some people, but I did read all 7 volumes of Arya the Masterpiece, and obviously if I don't have it in my hands to show you, then I don't own it anymore. So this is a slice of life manga following this girl who wants to be basically a gondolier on Mars in a city that is basically Venice, just on Mars. So it just explores her journey to become a gondolier, and there are some other characters that she befriends who are also working to become gondoliers. And that's basically all it is. It's very heavily slice of life. And if you have been following me for a little bit, you know I've definitely been struggling with slice of life recently. And at this point, I have given up trying to figure out which slice of life series I like and which ones I don't. Because this one has sci-fi elements, which I do tend to enjoy, but I felt like the sci-fi elements were not used as much as they could have been. Honestly, I was reading this, and even though it takes place on Mars, it has this whole big planet with all this civilization that obviously in our world we don't have that. So there were lots of things they could have done with that, and I just didn't get it. It felt entirely like this is just Earth, and except for there's magic cats, which I'll talk about in a second. I mean, there are a couple sci-fi things, but nothing that I couldn't believe would maybe happen on Earth. It didn't feel like something from another planet. And that was definitely disappointing to me because when I'm reading a sci-fi series, I like to see how the author uses those sci-fi elements to develop our world, see if that's believable or not. The best word for me to describe this manga is it's very nice. The characters were nice. The art was nice. Especially in the double page spreads, I did really like those, but I didn't find the art groundbreaking or anything. It was nice. Like I said, the story is very heavily slice of life, so if you like those, maybe you'll like this, but it just didn't do anything for me, really. It was exactly what I was expecting. As soon as I started reading the first volume, pretty much within the first chapter, I knew that this is exactly what I was expecting from the series. Pretty heavily slice of life manga with some very minor sci-fi elements, cute characters, and that's what it was for me. The only thing that kept me reading it was a desire to mark it as completed. That's it. It was perfectly fine to read, but I feel no connection to it at all. Except for the magic cats. I did like the magic cat chapters. There seems to be about one every volume, and those ones were definitely enjoyable. They were mysterious. I liked that. There were even some fantasy elements going on there. Definitely enjoyed those, but again, they were very rare and they could not carry the story for me. Oh, one other thing is in this manga, the Earth is described as fully mechanized, which sounded very interesting, but we never see any glimpses of Earth, and I totally understand why. That's not what the story is about, but every time I read a little part or a little hint at what Earth is like, I just wanted to be like, oh, can you write a story about Earth? Because that sounds a lot more interesting than what is happening on Mars. Anyway, that's it. I'll stop talking about this. I obviously didn't hate it. It was perfectly fine, but I'm never going to think about this manga again, honestly. The next volume I read in August was Blood on the Tracks, volume 14, and usually when I'm reading a series like this, where as the volume comes out, I read it right away, I don't mention it in these manga reads videos, but I do want to talk about Blood on the Tracks, especially this new section or new arc that we're in, because I've seen a lot of discussion of Blood on the Tracks dragging, or people don't like this new arc and what's happening. And while I totally understand why people wouldn't like this, I really am enjoying this new section, exploring our main character and the ramifications of the events of the first part of the series. One thing I mention almost every single time I read a Shuzo Oshibi manga is how much Shuzo Oshimi puts himself into his own series. And I feel like this is the one that has the heaviest amount of that, because this feels like Shuzo Oshimi is just writing his own relationship with his mother, and it's very interesting to read about. The author's note at the end of this volume is very interesting, because it isn't even like, hey, thanks for reading my manga, here's what I was thinking when I wrote this manga, signed Shuzo Oshimi. It feels like a diary entry that I should not be reading. It really feels like a deep glimpse into Shuzo Oshimi's brain, and I can't tell if it would be more interesting if that is true, or if this is just something Shuzo Oshimi is adding at the end of this manga to kind of add a new element to Blood on the Tracks and the story happening in here. But that's all I'm going to say about this. I'm definitely enjoying this new arc. I know some people thought that the first arc was a prequel because that's what Shuzo Oshimi said, I guess, but I think this just feels like other parts of his other series. Like in Flowers of Evil and Happiness, there's the main story, obviously, and then at the end, there's a couple volumes where you just explore the ramifications and the characters and how they are affected by the really terrible things that happen in the first part of the series. And this feels like that, just a little bit more extended. So I'm not feeling like Blood on the Tracks is dragging at all, but I know that the first part of this is very much a thriller. You don't know what's happening. You just want to keep reading, and this new section is not like that very much. But I do like the psychological aspects. I love reading psychological manga, and that's what this feels like, so I'm definitely still enjoying it. Speaking of psychological manga, I have no idea how to talk about this next manga, but I read volumes 1 through 12. That's all the volumes that are out right now of Land of the Lustrous. Volumes 1 through 6 were rereads technically, but I did notice while I was reading, once I got past volume 3, I had absolutely no memory of reading those volumes 4, 5, and 6. It was like I was reading them for the first time. But I know for a fact that I did read them because I marked them as read on Goodreads in like 2017, 2018. So I know I've read them, but it didn't feel like it when I was reading it. I really don't know how I'm going to talk about this manga, but this is basically about a group of gems. I didn't notice the whole gem thing I have going on this month, but this is about a group of gems, and they're basically protecting their world from Lunarians, which are people from the moon. So they're protecting Earth from the moon just because the Lunarians kidnap them and use them for jewelry. Our main character, Gem Phosphophylite, I think that's how you pronounce that, they are a pretty weak gem, so they are not good at fighting, or more like they're not allowed to fight because they are so weak, so they have to figure out what they want to do in this place that is basically all about fighting and defending themselves. And yeah, this manga is also very mysterious because we don't know what's happening with the Lunarians, where the gems go when they're kidnapped, what happens to them. It's very action-packed, it's very psychological because Phosphophylite goes through a lot of changes, both mentally and physically. And yeah, so this is one of those manga that explores humanity with inhuman characters, and I just love those series so much. Now, while I was reading, especially when I got to volume 9, 10, 11, 12, I felt like this series could have ended at any moment. It really felt like it was building up to an ending, and honestly, I felt like volume 12 could have been the end of the series, and it would have made sense. It's not the end of the series, I know it's still ongoing, but it felt like it could have been an ending, and I would have believed it. So I'm very interested to see where it's going to go from here. There are a lot of changes happening in this manga, obviously, and I think it's like one of the most interesting and unique manga I've ever read in terms of the world, obviously, but the story as well, because these characters are gems. They have no lifespan. They might explode into a million pieces because the Lunarians have like broken them, but then 100 years pass and they have basically healed into their original body. And so a lot of time passes in this manga. That's all I'm going to say about this. I'm definitely enjoying it. I'm very eager to see where it goes from here. I really can't believe it. This is not the ending of this manga, but can't wait to see what happens after this. And the last manga I read in August is the series that I read 16 volumes of in 2 days. I was not expecting that, but I definitely love this manga. But that series is What Did You Eat Yesterday? I read all 20 volumes that are out right now. This is still an ongoing manga. It's a slice of life story between these two characters. They are a gay couple living in Japan together. They're in their 40s at the start of the manga. One of them is a lawyer, the other one is a hairdresser, and they live together, and the lawyer guy likes to cook, and it basically just explores them living their lives. Time passes pretty quickly in this manga, so we see some pretty significant life experiences for these characters, life events that really affects them and how they deal with it together. So I think that's why I love this manga so much. The cooking parts, I don't care about those. That's not why I read this. I didn't find them boring. Like sometimes when I'm reading a manga, like Julia Richard, and they're talking about like the topic of the manga, I kind of glaze over and I don't care about that. But in those cases, it feels boring. This one, it didn't feel boring. I just feel like I don't need to read about cooking. I don't care. But what is important about the cooking is that's how these characters bond, not just with each other, but also with other characters. There's lots of friend characters in here or other characters that they meet, and just the love of food really connects people in this manga. So again, I have failed to figure out when I'm gonna like a slice of life manga and when I'm not going to like it. I've tried. This one, I was a little bit weary because it is about cooking. I didn't know if I was gonna care about that. I didn't, but the characters were so well done that is why I really connected to it. I also liked the exploration of being gay in Japan. You don't see too many manga that explore that. I do have a couple on my shelves, obviously, and I do definitely seek those out. So I'm very happy I read this for that aspect. But I do also just love the two main characters, their relationship. Sometimes they do have some arguments or some things in their lives that happen and they have to work through those things together. And so having two characters who are definitely adults, just living their adult lives, apparently that's a slice of life manga I enjoy. But yeah, I don't know what else to say about this. Definitely enjoyed it. This is my second Fumi Yoshinaga work, and you better believe I have gone out and started looking for more of her manga because I've enjoyed both of them so much. They are very different settings and stories in general, but I enjoyed them both immensely. So Fumi Yoshinaga is pretty much an auto-buy author for me. Those are all the manga I read in August. Some absolutely fantastic ones, some that were disappointing, but generally pretty positive. So you can't ask for much more than that. If you've read any of these manga, please go ahead and leave your comments on them down below. But that's gonna be it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!